Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, 8 years after fleeing a genocide in Myanmar, can the Rohingya ever return home?
I want to go home with justice, to get back my land and property. I want to see peace there. It's been 8 years since I came here for the third time. How much longer must we suffer?
Now home to one of the world's largest refugee camps, Bangladesh says it can no longer support the more than 1 million Rohingya who live there. I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take.
My name is Tony Cheng. I'm a Bangkok-based correspondent for Al Jazeera English. And I've just come back from Bangladesh, where we were reporting on a conference looking at the future of the Rohingya.
Tony Cheng, welcome to The Take. I want to start talking about Cox's Bazar. Now, this is a city in southeastern Bangladesh, and it's got these dual identities, right? On the one hand, it's a resort town. It's home to the world's longest natural sea beach. But then on the other hand, it's also home to one of the world's largest refugee camps. I mean, more than 1 million Rohingya refugees who fled a genocide in Myanmar next door. So let's start there. Tell us a little bit about Cox's Bazar. What is it like there?
Well, the city itself, it's a resort town. It's got, lots of hotels, lots of restaurants. We arrived just as the monsoon rains were hitting. So it was kind of a bit of a dramatic arrival. Then we drove through the town. We were heading down to where this conference was taking place, that amazing beach that you talked about, alongside the Bay of Bengal, is home to a number of resort hotels, the fanciest of which was playing host to this conference, the delegates, many of whom had come from host nations. There's also, in the last 10 years, sort of emerged this huge NGO-driven industry. I say 10 years, 8 years, in fact, since the main exodus of Rohingya came in 2017, 700,000 poured across the border trying to escape a genocide which has been committed by Myanmar's military. And now there is this huge sort of base of aid workers, other support staff who are there basically trying to make sure this camp keeps running.
Okay, so there was a conference in Cox's Bazar last week, and I suppose the main takeaway was Bangladesh's interim leader, Muhammad Yunus, Nobel Prize winner, essentially saying that his country can no longer carry the burden of sheltering so many people on its own.
During last 8 years, people of Bangladesh, in particular the host community here in Cox's Bazar, have been making tremendous sacrifices. The impact on our economy, resources, environment, and ecosystem, society, and governance have been huge.
And look, there are a lot of factors at play here. For one, Bangladesh is in a really delicate place politically in the wake of the Awami League government being toppled in a mass uprising last year. But then you compound that with the seismic changes that we're seeing in the global aid landscape. So help us flesh this out a little bit. Why is Bangladesh struggling, and why is it now asking the world for help in this way?
Well, Muhammad Yunus basically said that the Rohingya issue has been forgotten. I mean, if you look at the global news headlines, there is something hitting every day. We've got tariffs, trade issues, the war in Ukraine, Gaza. And in amongst all of this, there is very little space for the Rohingya. In fact, they've been there for 8 years, but since 2017, it has exploded. 700,000 came. Then in the years that followed, many hundreds of thousands more. These camps cost in excess of $900 million a year. Now, as you just said, Bangladesh is not a rich country anyway. It's under huge pressure at the moment. And they just can't get the funding to keep this place going on their own. And we've also seen the international community, which, when the genocide happened, had committed very significant sums of money to keep these people safe, to keep them fed and housed. And they just haven't kept up with the donations. In fact, many of the agencies we spoke to said that only 40% of the financial commitments that had been made had been kept.
Okay, so what sort of solutions is Muhammad Yunus calling for?
Well, that's a good question. He had a 7-point plan, ultimately, which was really directed at getting them back home. It wasn't very clearly laid out. I mean, I think he does understand that at this stage, the possibility of the Rohingya returning in significant numbers is very small. The situation in Myanmar remains extremely precarious.
Yeah. So, okay, just let's dig into that solutions discussion just a little bit more. It sounds like there's really two aspects to it. One is just help with money, right? You said $900 million per year just running these camps. So somebody needs to help just financially to keep the status quo. And then the discussion after that is, how do we get out of the status quo? I know that one possible solution that was floated is a semi-independent free zone between Bangladesh and Myanmar. Obviously, Muhammad Yunus isn't in the position to make that happen, but maybe it's about starting the conversation.
Yeah, and interestingly, I think that was pretty much the theme of this conference. Muhammad Yunus, again, wasn't particularly clear in his 7-point plan. It was a little woolly, but this was a conversation that he was trying to start. This is going to be the first of 3 conferences. And I think what he was trying to lay out was the problems that Bangladesh is undergoing at the moment, the fact that they can't support all of these people, but also the responsibility the international community has.
Therefore, we urge all parties and partners to work hard for charting a practical roadmap for their speedy, safe, and dignified, voluntary, and sustainable return to their homes in Rakhine as soon as possible.
934 million, to be precise, is the exact amount they estimate they need. Again, it's a shortfall of only 40% of the committed donations they've got this year. And again, if you look at what's happening around the world, it's not just the United States that's cutting its funding for these types of programs. The United Kingdom, other European powers, they're all looking at committing more to defense, other issues too. And, right. In this crisis of funding, the Rohingya are just getting completely forgotten about.
Who's the most likely to step up with some money?
That's a very good question. I don't think they really know. I mean, China was there and as one of the major donors was present at the conference. But I think we're seeing China taking very tentative steps into this kind of world. China does have a very great interest in Rakhine State, where the Rohingya come from. It's got an awful lot of power in Myanmar, both with the rebel groups and with the military government. So it is potentially in a position to exert influence. But I think at this stage, it's very hard to know what China could do. We've seen other donors like Qatar, Turkey, a lot of the European powers. But no one really stepped forward and was saying they were going to put their hands in their pocket. And again, with that $900 million amount, it really would be a very significant commitment for any one country to make.
Any reaction from Myanmar's government to the conference and what Yunus was talking about?
There were some representatives there, but they were keeping their heads down. Interestingly, when we were last inside Myanmar, in March, I sat down with the spokesman for the military government, and he was very keen to talk about the Rohingya and said that, the military government did want to get them back. However, in that conversation, he kept on referring to them as Bengalis, which is the offensive word people inside Myanmar often use to refer to the Rohingya. The implication is that they are immigrants from outside, that they don't belong inside Myanmar. And again, it was the military that was really behind the genocide that forced them out of their homes. The military has said this in the past couple of years several times, and there was an attempted repatriation program proposed by Myanmar's military, but it got nowhere because the Rohingya just don't trust them.
More with Tony after the break.
Within days of starting his second term, President Donald Trump issued pardons to more than 1,500 people who'd been charged or convicted of federal crimes. One of those was Ross Ulbricht, a young man serving a double life sentence for creating an online criminal marketplace called Silk Road, where users traded guns and drugs. Who is Ross Ulbricht? What does his pardoning tell us about where power really lies in the American justice system? Hear the full story on True Crime Reports.
Okay, so Tony, I want to talk more about the Rohingya for a moment. For those who don't know, or just maybe want a refresher, they are a stateless ethnic minority, predominantly Muslim, and they're from the Rakhine State, which is in the far west of Myanmar. Now, they've faced extreme persecution over the years, state-sponsored persecution going back to the 1960s. But I feel like in these discussions, they're sometimes defined by their victimhood, and they can become almost side characters in their own story, their own struggle. You've spent years reporting on the Rohingya. What can you tell us about the culture, the cuisine, the people you've met with? What does it mean to be Rohingya beyond just the persecution?
Yes, I think we do often see them as very separate, but they are deeply embedded in Myanmar. And have been for centuries. There are records going back suggesting Rohingya communities have been living in Myanmar for over 1,000 years. And what is now Rakhine State was an independent kingdom, Arakan at one stage. And the Rohingya appear to have been a very significant part of the population there. They are a Muslim minority, and they maintain that very, very strictly. You can see in the camps, people are very religious. But they are also very integrated. One of the families we spent time with over the last week was the father was a lawyer. He had been educated inside Yangon, very literate man, very highly educated. His two daughters, one of whom appeared in a piece we filmed talking about cooking, actually. She was working part-time with one of the NGOs that was in the camp.
At the moment, you're getting $12 a month. Is that enough to feed your family?
I want to buy chicken, but I can't. Right now, with the $12. If $12 will reduce $6, it will be more difficult for us.
They are often referred to as the most persecuted ethnic minority in the world. And more than 90% of them have now been forced out of their homes and their country. So they are in a very precarious position, but they are very well educated. They've been there for a long time. The culture is slightly divided. Inland in Rakhine State, there are a lot of people who work in farming, but along the coast, fishing is the predominant industry the Rohingya have been engaged with over the centuries. And to that end, when you look at Rohingya cuisine, fish is what the Rohingya love, and it is very spicy. We had a little bit, and it is eye-wateringly hot, lots of green chilies. But it's also a very important part of Rohingya culture. A friend in Yangon was telling me that he and his other Rohingya friends meet frequently. In 1 or 2 days a week, they cook together, they eat together, and they talk together. It is, in that sense, it's still a male-dominated society, and the men and the women tend to eat separately. But food, discussion, politics, this is a major part of what they talk about. And of course, at the moment, what is really dominating the conversation is what is going to happen to the people in Cox's Bazar.
More than 1 million people have been driven off their land in the Rakhine State, and they've been forced into these camps. You've spent time there. You've visited and spoke with Rohingya living in the camps. What is daily life like for them?
It's very interesting. You can see people are really trying hard to stay busy, but there is just not very much you can do. It's interesting. We went to film from a high point, and you would have thought, what is effectively a Bangladeshi forest on the border, with a sudden influx of more than 1 million people, would feel very overcrowded. But it's the monsoon season at the moment. The trees are very lush. And when we got up to this point, it sort of reminded me of being on the other side of Myanmar's border in Thailand. It looked a little like one of the border towns. You could see lots of rooftops, but it really looked quite pleasant and green. It's when you get down to ground level, there are just people everywhere. And it goes on for kilometer after kilometer after kilometer. People going about their daily business, well, what what they can do. A lot of people hanging around, talking to each other, and children just everywhere. And this is another of the astonishing things about these camps. Of that 1.5 million people, 750,000 are under the age of 18.
That's unbelievable.
It really is.
Just children.
You would have thought that there would be, basic educational systems in place for them. And there were. We saw the schools, we saw the centers where there were activities organized, and they have pretty much all been shut down because the funding has gone. And the only funding that really exists now is focused on food.
Yeah. Okay. So what is the current situation in Myanmar right now? Why is returning home unlikely in the near future, at least?
Well, we still have a very unstable security situation across Myanmar, but particularly in Rakhine State. When the conference was going on, there was fighting going on just across the border in the town of Mongdor. There's still a battalion of government troops who are there. So you have a situation where the military are slowly being pushed out and are really only holding on in a couple of big towns. The main opposition to the military is the Arakan army. They are a very effective fighting force. They've now taken large swathes of Rakhine State. They haven't yet taken the state capital, Sitwe. They're still fighting over Mongdor on the Bangladeshi border. But the Arakan army themselves are also somewhat in conflict with the Rohingya. I think many Rohingya feel that they are not welcome. There are also some armed groups from the Rohingya ethnic minority themselves who have been enlisted by the military to try and fight the Arakan army. And that's really made the whole situation far more complicated because the Arakan army, which is in a very dominant position now, is actually seeing the Rohingya as armed militants in certain cases, or certainly armed opposition to what they're trying to achieve. So, it's a very complicated situation, and for most of the people in the camps, it's far too insecure to return.
So the Rohingya are caught in the middle of a civil war. So they're in a civil war, but there's two sides fighting without them for the most part, and that's why they've been driven out.
Yeah, absolutely. They're just caught in the middle. But again, this is the terrible position the Rohingya are in because they are very unpopular with the military. And to a certain extent, the Arakan army, which is predominantly made up of Rakhine-based Buddhists, appears to have quite a hostile policy towards them as well. Lots of Rohingya accuse the Arakan army of committing, violent acts against them. Last year, there was the burning of Rohingya homes in Butidang that the Rohingya say the Arakan army was responsible for. Earlier this year, there was an exodus of people into Bangladesh across the Naf River who were attacked with drones dropping bombs, and more than 100 died in those attacks or were drowned. And again, the Rohingya accused the Arakan army of being behind that. Now, the Arakan army say they're not involved, that they are trying to create a situation where the Rohingya will be able to come back. But there is an awful lot of suspicion on both sides. And in the very confusing situation inside Myanmar at the moment, it's very hard to know who's telling the truth.
So to wrap up, this conference was put together to figure out what to do with the Rohingya. But you were there in Cox's Bazar, walking around talking to them. As opposed to asking what to do with them, you actually asked them themselves. So what did people tell you that they wanted?
That was really interesting, actually, because we were there on the anniversary of what they call Rohingya Genocide Day, the actual day, the 25th of August, when they were forced out of their country. And they had two very simple requests. One was justice. They want to see those responsible for those crimes being punished. And they want to go home.
Yes, we're helpless. We thank Bangladesh for giving us shelter, but we're under persecution here as well. We're scolded a lot with comments like, "You Burmese people, go back to your country."
The problem with both of those things, it is very, very hard. We met the head of the UN Independent Commission who's investigating those crimes. he said the budget crisis is affecting them too, so their investigations are being severely hindered. And they're complicated enough because they're trying to investigate these terrible crimes from outside of the country. And the other thing, they want to go home. Well, at this stage, just looks completely unrealistic. There have been various suggestions proposed to maybe a safe zone close to the Bangladeshi border, but it would require enormous security guarantees from one of those major countries, one of the major donors. And at this stage, it looks very unlikely that anyone could actually do that.
Okay, so it sounds like in the here and now, the real issue is securing funding and making life as comfortable as possible in the camps.
Yeah, and that is fundamentally important too. And as I said, a lot of those basic services have been shut down. The one that is still going on is the food aid. Now, every man, woman, and child at the moment is getting $12 a month in food aid. Now, that's pretty basic rations, about 40 cents a day, but it does buy you basic provisions like food, grain, a little bit of protein. And we saw in the WFP warehouses, there were some live chickens, there were some live fish, but you're basically living on one fish a month. But the problem is that funding is going to run out in November. And when it does, those rations drop down to $6. So all of that protein disappears. And one official from the World Food Programme told me that is so little that you might as well be giving them nothing.
Tony Cheng, thank you for coming on The Take today.
Thanks very much. Good to speak to you, Kevin.
And that's The Take. Look, we'd love to get your thoughts and questions about today's episode. What do you want to know about Rohingya refugees in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh? Let's keep the conversation going. We're always checking in, and we'll see you tomorrow.